From the
I don't know what to say. I'm just speechless.
to the we see all sorts of life-changing moments at McKinney Competitions. How would you react? Cars, houses, tech bundles and more from just £2 a ticket. No purchase necessary. For competitions, rules and conditions, see mckinneycompetitions.com.
The rail network really needs to go into facilities that people use, like our airports, like our harbours, and there needs to be a whole connectivity. I mentioned hospitals earlier.
Railways were on the way out and road transport was on the way in, and they didn't have the vision to see that if they piled everything onto the roads, that sooner or later the roads would become totally congested.
It was a day of absolute horror. Every horse and cart in Armagh, anything that could carry anything, was summoned. Was summoned out of town to come and try and bring people up to the infirmary. Things are happening. We feel that Portadown to Armagh will be the first link to be reinstated of all the closures that took place in the 1950s and 1960s.
Those were the voices of William Hutchinson, who is the chairman of the Portadown Armagh Railway Society, and Willie Parr, committee member. And this is your host, Elaine Ingram, and today William and Willie sat down and spoke to me all about the Portadown Armagh Railway Society, known as PARS, and what the organisation is all about and what they're hoping to achieve, which is to get 10 miles of railway open between Portadown and Armagh, and in general to get trains back on the rails again. They also talked about the terrible tragedy, the Armagh rail disaster of 1889, and how that all happened and how it affected the people from Armagh. So let's hear from William and Willie now. I'm here today with Willie Parr and William Hutchinson from the Portadown Armagh Railway Society, and we're here to chat today about the ongoing need for the railway to be reintroduced between Armagh and Portadown, and strides that have been made over the years, and I suppose the struggles that you've come across while you've been trying to get things done. So maybe first of all, William, you can maybe just tell us a little bit about the society itself and your part in it and how it came about. You're the chairman, I believe.
I'm the chairman,
yeah.
And the Portadown Armagh Railway Society was set up in August 2012. And the aim was to lobby or campaign to have the railway brought back to Armagh again from Portadown. The Armagh line was closed in October 1957, the 1st of October 1957, and the people of Armagh have always missed the railway since it was there. The railway was well used by the public then. In fact, the local officials would say that tickets went up, the number of patrons who used from 1938 right to it closed 1957, fivefold from 1938. So there was a great passenger usage in the city of Armagh. And of course, when the railway was first built and it left Belfast on the 1st of March 1848, it left the town of Belfast and came to the city of Armagh. So Armagh was a very industrial, popular city, and it's where the railway company really wanted to go to. And there was great disappointment when the railway closed in October 1957. In fact, there were hundreds of people at the railway station when it closed, and the people so admired the railway. There were hundreds of people there. They went up and they actually patted the steam engine. Right. They lifted pieces of coal off the tender at the back to keep for souvenirs, and the train, which was meant to leave at 10 to 10 that night, left at just after 10 o'clock. Right. Because the people held it back, and there was shaking of hands and there was all of that. So it was a huge night for Armagh when the railway left. So ever since that, just to get back to what we're about in the Portadown Armagh Railway Society, we're trying to have the line reinstated, not for nostalgia, because things have moved on. There are now too many motor cars on the road. The Portadown Armagh Road, which is known as the A3, there are now about 17,500 cars use that road every day. Yeah. It's just an ordinary A-class road, and there are hold-ups on the road all of the time. And the people in Armagh City, which is an expanding city, as we can see right around every boundary of the city is expanding, and there's a huge need for a fast and efficient rail network between Armagh and Belfast. We believe it would be highly used by the people.
And the thing is, like you say, and maybe you could tell me this, Billy, you say that it was used and it was really popular, and it was, I mean, you can kind of understand in some way if railways are closed down because, they're not viable and they're not being used. Why in 1957 did they decide to close the railway in the first place?
Well, you see, it was basically, most people would say, a political decision, because all the railway lines west of the Bann were closed all at the same time. The lines right at the... So
they didn't care that this was a used railway?
No, you see, they were the government at the time were very road-minded, and a number of them were said to have interests in road transport, and so it was a decision they made that everything could be carried in lorries. And of course, after the war, the First World War, lorries became more and more popular because soldiers came back from the wars and they'd learned to drive and so forth, and therefore road transport became more and more popular. And of course, as far as the buses were concerned, they could go from the middle of a village to the middle of a village, whereas some of the railway stations were situated away outside the village. I mean, Moy would be a good example, where the station's about 2 miles away from the village, and Rich Hill, it was 3 miles away from the village. So it meant, in effect, that the general idea was that railways were on the way out and road transport was on the way in. And they didn't have the vision to see that if they piled everything onto the roads, that sooner or later the roads would become totally congested. And the unfortunate thing was they closed all these railway lines west of the Bann, I suppose for the obvious reason that the population is a lot thinner in those areas. And it meant that basically the railway was wiped out over about 70% of Northern Ireland, one way or another. Actually, one thing that William was saying there about the railway being very popular at that time, the railway was always very popular in Armagh. I remember about 1959, there was another newspaper in Armagh called the Armagh Guardian.
Right.
And there was a fella I was very friendly with. He was a cub reporter. He was only about 16 or so at the time. And he had got to hear that they'd been lifting the railway track from the border, and they were right up as far as Armagh. And every day there was a steam train and wagons came from Portadown, and they were lifting at the level crossing at the Lochgall Road in Armagh. So Richard and I went down to the station and we started to talk to the men. And one of them suggested, or maybe we suggested, could we go for a ride on the train to Portadown when they were going back that night? So, to cut a long story short, Richard and I travelled in the guard's van of the rail lifting train from Armagh to Portadown. So I could claim to be the last civilian who probably ever travelled on that line. I was always interested in transport, but I thought it was a shame the Armagh line was closed.
Yeah. Because
it still carried a lot of traffic. And I was on it. I travelled quite regularly on it myself.
Yeah.
As a schoolboy, about a few years earlier. And, you know, I think the Armagh Council were said to have been the only council west of the Bann that didn't object to the line being closed.
That didn't object?
Yes, and that's in the archives.
Right.
On the Ulster Gazette reports.
Yeah. You think that they would have been the ones to object, you know, that would have been the logic, you know, given that it was such a popular route.
Oh.
So is that, so that with that you formed the society?
Yes, there always had been a huge interest in the railway coming back to Armagh again. In fact, a bit like the Borders line in Scotland, there were people, that's the line from Edinburgh to Tweedbank. It was closed 32 miles in length, or if not 35. The people there always rued the day that the railway closed in Tweedbank, and they campaigned, and just a few years ago that line was reinstated by the Scottish Government.
So there is hope.
And so there is hope. They've opened 32 miles of line. So we're hoping that it's just in and around 10 miles of line between Portadown and Armagh. That isn't very much. And
there's a lot of the structure is still there, I believe, isn't it?
Most of the infrastructure is still there. In fact, there are overbridges still there as well. And it would be a great project for the government to undertake. We know that Minister Mallon is very interested in having some of the railways reinstated again.
Yeah, she's been quite vocal about it, hasn't she?
She's quite vocal, and she's working with Minister Ryan down south as well. And we're hopeful that the All-Ireland Rail Review will do many things. We've also been working with our local council as well, the ABC Council. And there are monies coming forth from the Department for Infrastructure and some monies from the local council. We've had a scoping study already, and we're moving on to the next stage now to have a technical study on the line, which should be progressed very, very soon. So things are happening. We feel that Portadown to Armagh will be the first link to be reinstated of all the closures that took place in the 1950s and 1960s. It's a huge step for the government to put into reverse policies that were taken in the 1950s and 1960s. So, but we feel it would be a progressive move to have this line reopened for the people of the city of Armagh. We think it'll bring many benefits to employment, many benefits for tourism, many benefits for the climate, take a lot of cars off the A3. We believe that there are so many benefits involved with all of this. We have the new SRC College in Armagh as well, and I'm sure many students would like to come from far and near using the local railway system.
Yeah, because I mean, when you think about it right now, I mean, you have the train that's going directly from Dublin to Belfast, and what would it take the amount of people now, like students you say or anything like that, if they're going from Armagh, if they're going to Belfast or Dublin to go to university, or vice versa if they're coming up, they have to get buses and lifts and everything to just be able to hop on a train and go to Portadown, or it would be just so much handier.
And of course, so many of our young people today aren't interested in obtaining a driving licence or getting a driving licence or have the hassle with it. They prefer to use public transport.
Yeah, and the amount of costs to get their cars insured. I mean, insurance is a huge issue for young people getting cars. So yeah, public transport is the only way for them to go.
Plus, they want to save the environment as well. They're very keen to save the environment and use. But if there isn't a good and efficient, clean public transport system, the young people just won't be interested. But trains today, the patronage of what railways we have in this part of the world now, and the Main Dublin line, for instance, Belfast Dublin line, there are a lot of people using the railways today. It's gone up, I don't know, must be 5 or 6 fold over the recent decade.
Well, I know the Dublin one is always packed. I mean, the Dublin to Belfast one, I use it occasionally, and it's most often full.
The statistics would tell you from proper statistics would tell you that when the GNR axed all those lines in 1957, as William talked about, there were approximately 6 million passengers using the entire GNR system.
Right.
When the COVID started, a year or so ago, Northern Ireland Railways, now with their truncated system, they were carrying 16 million passengers.
Wow.
On a small system.
Yeah.
Whereas the whole GNR system, and that number travelling in Northern Ireland Railways has been going up by between 500,000 and 1 million passengers every year for the last 7 or 8 or 9 years.
Yeah.
And another thing is too that at the moment, the fastest express bus between Armagh and Belfast takes an hour. And I think actually that's on a Sunday night when there's not much traffic. Most of them take around just between an hour and 5 minutes and an hour and a quarter. But if there was a train on now, it could actually travel from Armagh to Great Victoria Street in 40 minutes.
Yeah. And it's a way more comfortable journey too. Yeah.
And I mean, people that happen to go by car are well aware that in the morning congestion hour, it can take anything up to 3/4 of an hour to get from Lisburn into Belfast.
Oh, don't talk to me. I drove up to Belfast this morning and I got stuck in traffic. Yeah, so I know all about it. But yeah, and I've seen the photographs. I don't know if any of our listeners have seen the photographs of the network, the railway network that used to be. There's a great one that was doing the rounds where it showed all all the stations and then how they diminished and, you know, down to nothing. And it's just incredible to think that in this day and age, when we're supposed to be so environmentally friendly, you know, we're trying to lower our carbon footprint and everything, that this is not something that's been looked at. I know you mentioned Eamon Ryan there of the Green Party in the south, you know, and I'm sure he's very much on board with this kind of thing. But if the ministers like Nicola Mallon and Eamon Ryan are involved, it certainly seems that something will potentially be actually done instead of, I mean, you've been trying to get this done for a long time. And tell me about the petition. You had a petition and you got 10,000 people's signatures.
Yes, there was a lady in the town called Susan McComb, a lovely lady, and Susan, on her own bat, went round the town with many petitions and left them in shops, every type of shop possible. Her with her young child in a little buggy, and she went round the whole town and she obtained 10,000 signatures of the people of Armagh, from the people of Armagh wanting the railway to be reopened again, and that was presented to the ministers in Stormont at the time.
And that probably spurred on some more debate about it as well.
A lot of debate, and I believe it's the only infrastructure request that has been asked for by 10,000 signatures. There's been many projects throughout the province, but never a petition by 10,000 people to have it done. And one would like to think, even though it's so many years gone by now, that petition would lie in the vault somewhere and be ignored. Petition? About 5 years ago.
Yeah.
About 5 years ago.
Incidentally, it's worth mentioning, there was another survey done among foreigners. Now, it was specifically done among people who were French, German, etc., on the Enterprise Express service between Dublin and Belfast. Now, I'll emphasise it was not a scientific survey.
Yeah.
It was only done among about 20 people on the train over a period of about 3 months. And 6 out of 10 of them said they wouldn't consider going to Armagh as a tourist attraction because there was no rail connection.
Really?
So it shows you the way Armagh is losing out in tourism from foreign people who are travelling from Belfast to Dublin or Dublin to Belfast. And many of them would be interested in getting off at Portadown and going to see Armagh's cathedrals, the planetarium,
there's so much to offer in Armagh.
The observatory, and all the various attractions that Armagh has. In fact, the mall itself is a tourist attraction on its own.
Yeah.
And I mean, these people say they would love to go to Armagh, but they're not going to get involved in the hassle of trying to get the last 10 miles in a bus or a taxi or whatever.
Yeah, it's like Donegal. Donegal is another forgotten little pocket of Ireland that doesn't get, because there's no transport. In fact, to go to Donegal, go to Donegal from Warren Point, you have to, which is where I'm from, you have to go down to Dublin and then across on bus. You have to get a bus to Dublin and then a bus to Donegal, which is, you know, seems like completely illogical when it's the other direction altogether. But there you go. Yeah, that's another infrastructure thing, and another, you know, we just need in general to have things looked at, you know, in terms of moving around the country, you know, in a much more efficient way.
I think the buzzword to have nowadays is connectivity.
Yeah,
we need good connectivity between all the people and every county in Ireland, and we all need to be interconnected. The modern transport systems now, the railway system, for instance, you should travel comfortably at 90 miles an hour on rail.
Yeah, and even in terms of cities being overly populated.
Yeah.
There are people living on the outskirts or living in different counties that are closer to cities because they can't afford rents, or they can't, there are no places to live in the cities, but you're still working there, so you need to be able to get there.
Yes, and that's the importance of having a fast corridor from places like Armagh or even Dungannon eventually, and other places that fast corridors and affordable transport to take you from your home to the place of work in Belfast and back home again that evening, to keep cities like Armagh viable and to keep young families within cities and working within cities, that folks can go to work and come home again that evening. In fact, there's a big difference between how railways were viewed down south and up north here. Up north they keep talking about the viability of a railway system and as if it must wash its face or whatever, whereas down south railways are treated more as a service.
Yeah, well, that's the way they should be.
For the people, and servicing for the people and all of that. And we in Powers would believe that railways should be a fast and efficient service to move people about freely between towns and between cities and make the economy really, really viable.
Yeah.
And provide that excellent connectivity that's needed and take cars off the road, importantly.
Yeah. And the other thing, like some people might say, the train is expensive. It is more expensive than getting a bus. But if there were more trains, they would probably bring the cost down as well, if they were used more.
I don't think you're quite right when you say that.
No.
The buses are cheaper, because really, day returns in Northern Ireland on the railway, if you travel after 9:30, you automatically get a 1/3 discount.
Yeah.
So say the fare was £12 up until 9:30 in the morning, £12 return, you would get that same ticket for £8 return.
Yeah.
If you travel once the peak hour's over and for the rest of the day.
Yes.
And I think the buses have begun to copy that up to a certain extent. But the bus fares, you see, TransLink run the whole operation in the north, and by and large the fares are comparable in most cases.
And if you get them well in advance online, but I suppose that depends too on when you're free to travel. Like if I go to Dublin on the train, I'm going. It's not a day return; it would be the next day, and that puts the price up quite a bit. But if you do get, but the advantage to that as well is that if you get the bus, you have to get to the bus and you have to park, and there's no parking. Whereas in the train station, you can park for free. So, that's why it's cheaper in the end to get the train. Actually, does work out cheaper. But anyway,
well, Northern Ireland Railways would say, and I think they're correct actually, that their fares on the railway, especially, are cheaper than anywhere else in the British Isles.
Really?
Compared to Manchester, Liverpool, Glasgow, Bristol, anywhere you go I was talking to a fellow the other day, and if you book a fare from Manchester to London, just maybe at 5 or 10 minutes notice, it can cost you up to about £700 return for a first class ticket.
Okay. Well, it'd be definitely cheaper to fly there and back a few times.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah. Yeah, that sounds insane. But I'm sure that wouldn't be the norm. I know you can get.
The other thing I think that maybe throws people to a certain extent is that, as I understand it, TransLink have a policy that single fares are not all that much different from return fares.
Yeah.
So if you bought a day return from, say, Portadown to Belfast off peak,
yeah, I
think it's around £9 return. Whereas if you buy a single, it could cost you maybe about £7.50 or something.
Yeah. Well, it doesn't make a lot of sense.
Well, I suppose it's maybe from a logistical point of view, they want to make sure that as far as possible, people who travel with them travel in both directions,
Yeah. I suppose, yeah, that's...
I lifted a ticket the other day I saw when I was on the train, and I think it was £13 from Derry to Mossley West, which is just outside, Belfast. That was for a single.
Yeah.
And as far as I know, the day of return from Londonderry is only about £15.
Well,
So you could travel 180 miles for £2 more than you can travel for about 90 miles.
the logic defies me as well.
Get ready to shake up summer with the Get Active ABC Sunshine Fill programme for kids and families. Get set for land-based adventure at our summer schemes, or why not get adventurous and maybe get wet at our Splashtastic Water Sports Summer programme. There are so many things to do, and all we need is you. See getactiveabc.com/summer for all the details.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about, now this is the thing that got me interested in this topic from the very start, was because Armagh, I have covered, your group extensively and, the ongoing, this ongoing quest to get the railway back. But I came across this a while ago when I was reading about the Armagh Rail disaster back in 1889.
12th of June, Wednesday, the 12th of June.
Yeah, can you
1889.
tell us a bit about that? Because to me, this was an absolutely horrendous thing that happened, which I wasn't even aware of. I'm sure people from Armagh are more aware of it than I was. But anyway, maybe for those who aren't.
That was an awful day for the city of Armagh. It started off innocently enough as a Sunday school excursion from the Methodist Church in Abbey Street in Armagh. And there was the band of the Irish Fusiliers marched in front of the children, and after they had a short service in the church, they marched down to the railway station, and they went down in procession, and there they met the train, and they were loading onto the train. Now the capacity on the train, I think the few days before, there were tickets sold for 800 people. 800 people. The interest then went up to 940.
Right.
And they reckon on the day of travel, the capacity perhaps could have been almost 1,000 people on that train.
And what was the capacity of the train? How many was the train supposed to hold?
The capacity of the train probably then was about 940. But they reckon there could be almost 1,000. There were people crowded onto the train, for instance, in the guard's van at the back. There were some soldiers in there. There were about 8 soldiers and 2 civilians with instruments and picnic baskets. And there were also passengers on the guard's van at the front as well. And people were packed in like sardines into that train, and the doors were locked. The driver was called McGrath.
Why did they lock the doors?
Apparently because it was to stop people maybe trying to get onto the train free as it left the station.
Oh, really? Yeah.
So they locked the doors on both sides of the carriages. The driver of the train that day was a Mr. McGrath. His fireman was called Parkinson, Mr. Parkinson, and they had left Dundalk on engine number 86 very early that morning, and had come up via Portadown and lifted 2 more third-class carriages in Portadown, empty carriages. They had 11 carriages with them. They collected another 2 carriages in Portadown, and then came on to Armagh, down the line that we wanted to talk about reopening there, down the Portadown Armagh line.
Yeah.
They came down, and then the train was too long for the platform, so they had to split the train in 2, and the passengers were shunted about.
Would this have been a norm for this type of thing? Would it have happened regularly, or to have such a large capacity and to have to split the train in 2 like that?
No, there could have been probably 2 or 3 excursions from Armagh run by organisations like the churches. But those only happened, it was an annual thing. It happened once a year.
Yeah.
It wasn't the thing.
And would they have had those big numbers?
They wouldn't have had those big numbers.
No.
Except maybe a couple of times a year at the most.
Yeah.
So the train, there were far too many people on the train. The driver of the train, number 86, Mr. McGrath, he had taken the engine up. It was a smaller engine than he would have required. He had a bit of a debate with. Is it Mr. Foster in the station? The station master, Mr. Foster, and he looked at the number of passengers and was a bit dilatory, and he wondered, well, he was always going to take number 86 up that embankment, but there's a 1 in 75 steep climb up the embankment, and a lot of people wondered whether the engine would get over it or not. But he showed confidence in his engine, so much so that there was a train due to leave Armagh at 10:35, and they were offered that train to bank behind them and push them up over the embankment. But the driver, Mr. McGrath, he refused, whether it was pride or whatever, but he refused that offer, saying that his engine could do it. But he gave off to Mr. Foster, the station master, and said, look, we should have been told down in Dundalk of the capacity of this train.
So it was a litany of errors.
So it was a litany of errors, plus it was a bank holiday. The regular man who would normally nominate the engine for the work was off on bank holiday the day before. So it was a litany of errors all around, as you say.
Yeah.
But anyway, the train, the man in charge of the train that day was called a Mr. Elliott. He was the superintendent of the train, and he was overseeing everything. He had responsibility for everything, and he was happy enough with the driver's decision. His thoughts were, well, the driver knows his engine.
Yeah.
If he feels it can get over the embankment, so be it. So he actually was on the footplate when the train left Armagh station at about what time? About 10 o'clock in the morning. Shortly after 10, it left Armagh Railway Station and headed up the Market Hill Newry line. And the train left and off it went. Doors locked. Everybody happy, content inside the carriages. In fact, there was one woman who heard the dispute between Mr. Foster and the driver, and she decided not to go on the excursion.
Oh.
So it must have been a heated, but everyone else was on the train, the doors were locked, and away they went up the embankment. And they got a few miles outside Armagh, near Dublin's Bridge, on the Collooney embankment.
So this is, you can actually see it from where we're sitting right now?
No, you couldn't see it, but it's just over there, behind those trees a bit over there.
So they headed up the Collooney embankment. They were going okay, and then the engine started to lose power, and in terms of railway terms, the engine stalled.
Right.
So it couldn't pull the engine and the carriages up the hill with approximately 1,000 passengers on behind. So they put the brake on in the front guard's van and the guard's van at the back. They put the two handbrakes on, and they decided to split the train. And they decided to uncouple the train between carriage number 5 and carriage number 6.
Right. And
they uncoupled the train, and they were going to take the engine, the tender, and one of the guards' vans and 5 carriages up to Hamilton's Bawn.
It's just up the road here.
Up the gradient, and then they were going to come back for the remainder of the carriages and bring them up, and then rejoin the train at Hamilton's Bawn.
Which sounds like it would have made sense. It sounds like something that might have worked, but it didn't.
On an embankment, it was dangerous. What they should have done was kept the train as a whole unit, and went back and walked back and put what do you call the things on the lines for making the noises?
Ballast?
No. The flare, not the flares, for the fog.
Fog detonators.
Fog detonators. They should have went back, walked down the line, and put fog detonators. When the next train coming went over, they made a bang and the train knew to stop.
Okay.
They had a policy then that if a passenger train left, that another passenger train could leave behind it 5-10 minutes later.
Yeah.
So all they used was a timing system. Right. So the next train coming behind was free to come behind that train.
You see, that would never happen now, Liam. In fact, the Armagh disaster created railway history because the railway signalling was completely altered as a result of it. I mean, nowadays, a train, they have what they call block sections, and a train coming behind cannot enter the block section ahead unless the signal has been cancelled for the train in front, and it has moved on into the next section.
Yeah.
But in those days, as William said,
It was just
I think it was a
fire time,
passenger train was allowed to follow another passenger train inside a certain time.
Yeah.
And a passenger train was allowed to follow a goods train in a much longer time because a goods train travelled slowly. But then they had still no way of knowing whether that train was still in that area or whether it had moved on. They were assuming all the time it had moved on.
Which sounds...
And of course, in the case of this excursion, it hadn't moved on and it had come to a stop. So the other train from Armagh, it was getting ready to leave at 25 to 11, thinking the line was completely clear.
So they uncoupled the first 5 carriages, and ideally what would happen was the 5 carriages would be brought to Hamilton Spawn, but in separating the train, the first 5 carriages daunted the carriages behind, which were sitting on a steep incline. And even though Mr. Elliot had ordered the guard at the back to put his brake on and to put stones under the wheels, he had ordered him to do that. He should not have left. The rules were that he shouldn't have left his brake under any conditions, but he did leave, and he put stones as instructed by Mr. Elliot under the wheels. The children obviously were happy. They were dancing, and with this daunt of the train and the movement within the carriages, the stones gave way, the back brake gave way, and there was doubt as to whether those in the guard's van at the back, whether they interfered with the brake or not. No one knows, because Mr. Henry, I think it was actually down putting stones on behind the train. So, but anyway, in any eventuality, the train took off. The remainder of the train took off down the incline, and the next train, the Newry, the ordinary train on that line, the Newry train, was on its way. Yeah. It had left Armagh station, was on the same line.
Assuming the line was clear.
Assuming the line was clear. And they came round the corner, just across the bridge over the Portadown Road, Armagh Portadown Road, to cross that bridge, and they looked up Collooney Embankment, and they saw the carriages coming for them about 500 yards away.
They also had the unfortunate that it was on a bend, so they didn't even have a straight run where they could have seen it in time. Not that they probably could have done much anyway.
So they put the
I think they had built up a speed of about 30 miles an hour.
Probably 35 miles an hour, 35, 40.
Which doesn't sound fast, but when you've got something coming the other way.
Something coming at about 45 miles an hour.
Yeah.
Freewheeling towards you, a lot of weight. Those remaining carriages. The driver did very, very well. He slowed the train down to about 5 miles an hour. He had to think of his own. He had 14 passengers plus some goods wagons on his own train. So he had to think of the responsibility that he had. So he slowed the train down to about 5 miles per hour. And it was the best he could do. But the oncoming carriages hit him, turned his engine number 9, over onto its right-hand side. And it lay on the embankment. The tender stayed upright, and the brake van, and in fact there was a horse attached just behind that, a lone horse behind that again. So, but it was left sitting upright. And what happened then is the last 3 carriages of the excursion train took the full impact, and they just fell like cardboard, and everybody was strewn everywhere, and we had. On the actual day, I think there were 77 or 79 actual deaths on the day, but the death toll went up to 88 when all the casualties and all were counted. It was a day of absolute horror. Every horse and cart in Armagh, anything that could carry anything, was summoned. Was summoned out of town to come and try and bring people up to the infirmary. Doctors came from the infirmary. Belfast was summoned. Doctors, the Great Northern Railway provided a special train to bring doctors and nurses from Belfast. It was just, I think the head of the Sunday school was Major Lynn, who was I think he was a surgeon in the army, and he said that he had been in battlefields where he hadn't seen so much carnage.
And it was like mostly women and children.
Women and children and
many children died. Do they know?
So there must have been about 30 children died. About 30 children died.
The thing was, you see, Elaine, in those days, all these coaches were made of wood.
Yeah.
And I mean, they just
collapsed.
Shattered in pieces. Yeah. Nowadays, the railway carriages are all made from steel. And not only are they made from steel, they're made in such a way that they're built to take a certain impact.
Yeah.
So if those had been steel coaches, it probably wouldn't have been nearly as serious. But the wooden coaches just completely shattered.
Yeah. How many people that were in those carriages? How many survived?
Well, obviously, there was about 1,000 people in the train, so
a lot of them would have been the one that was gone ahead.
A lot of them was the ones gone ahead. Plus, the first few carriages at the very top were okay. The minor injuries and that. But there's about 300 people injured as well. There were about 300 people injured. Those were a lot of casualties to deal with on the Collooney embankment that day, and people were absolutely horrified. One man. All the carriers, as we were saying, were invited to come out of Armagh. No matter what business you ran, if you had a horse and cart, you were to go out to that field. They were all ordered to come out and summoned to go out, and they went out to that field. One man who had a son and daughter on the train came out with his cart, and when he saw the devastation, I think Mr. Hughes was his name, when he saw the devastation, he dropped dead in the field.
Oh dear.
Railways have been operative for about 50 years at that stage, and that was by far the worst railway disaster that ever happened in the British Isles.
Yeah.
And I think even today it's still one of the top 4 or 5 disasters for the number who were killed and so forth. Yeah.
So the safety measures after that were
the block system. They brought in the block system. That 2 trains couldn't be on the same stretch of line at the same time, and they introduced new signallings and all of that. But that was taken out in Act of Parliament. But those systems were known about, but they were voluntary.
Yeah.
You didn't have to use them. But then I think the law came out a few months after.
It's terrible to think that it's the way of the world, isn't it? It usually takes some awful disaster before things. I'm just thinking of the Stardust, the fire, and it takes something terrible to happen for measures to be taken. Mm. And there was a statue then. There's a statue in Armagh in memory of that.
It was to commemorate the 125th anniversary.
And was your organisation involved in that?
Well, we were with the local council and the Methodist Church as well. There was a body set up, and of course the Mall Trust as well. We had to get permission to have the statue put on the Mall. It was it's of a little girl.
I know, I've seen it. It's
a little girl, and she's deliberately carrying a bucket. The bucket is empty because she never made it to the seaside. Oh. On that day, so the bucket is empty, but it depicts a little girl on her way to the seaside, and the innocence of that day for so many children who lost their lives, who should have had a special day. Yeah,
it's just so tragic, isn't it?
Yeah, but that's the Armagh Railway disaster, an awful disaster. Armagh had a week of burials. There was a real mourning about the town. You can imagine the effect that had on the city, and every single religion was affected. There were friends. An excursion train was a special train. All your friends and people you knew and people you worked with, they all had a great day out. Yeah. And every religion was represented on that train.
Sure, politics went out the window on a day like that.
Politics went out the window, and Armagh was just. It was a week of funerals, and a very, very sad week for the city in 1889. Yeah. But a lot of the folks are buried up in St Mark's Church, and there are special places there. The Steele family particularly had a heavy loss. They lost 5 in one family. Oh, gosh. The Steele family, and they were connected with the church as well, weren't they? He was he church superintendent, but it was an awful disaster.
And it's all written on the headstones in St Mark's graveyard about the various people who died in the railway disaster. Yeah.
But that's the Armagh Railway disaster. Sad a sad day for the city of Armagh. And we're just talking about bringing the railways back to Armagh again. It's just such a pity that Armagh paid the price for rail safety throughout the whole world, where they use the block system.
Yeah.
We paid the price for it, and yet Armagh City doesn't
have a railway.
And yet those 88 people paid for the safety of railways throughout the whole world.
Yeah, there's an irony there, isn't there?
There is a real irony there in all of that.
But so back to today now, and trying to get this 10 miles, which sounds so little, but you think it's going to happen, and the progress is there and the will is there. Well, any kind of objections? I mean, I've seen some things where people are saying, and I mentioned this to you before we started, people are saying things like, oh, putting money into this is just a nonsense, we need money for hospitals and everything. But I mean, to me, that's, we know we need money for hospitals, but it's a different thing. It's a completely different thing. What is your thought on that?
Well, even when we think of hospitals and money for hospitals, a lot of our hospitals are now centralised. For instance, when the railway was here, Armagh had Armagh Infirmary. We had our own infirmary. Everything's centralised to Craigavon now.
Yeah.
We have to go to Craigavon Hospital for those who need cancer care. A lot of them go forward to Belfast City Hospital. So even with the infrastructure that we have,
you still need to get to the hospital.
You have to get to the hospital. You must get there efficiently, quickly, and so a good transport infrastructure is important. They have centralised a lot of other infrastructure, so we need a good infrastructure to service that, a good transport infrastructure to service all of that. And even thinking back to 1957, people probably married someone of the same parish. Now, for instance, I have a young daughter and she's married and living in Germany. And people travel throughout the whole world now, and people are travelling and more, and people have destinations to go to. For instance, the rail network really needs to go into facilities that people use, like our airports, like our harbours, and there needs to be a whole connectivity. I mentioned hospitals earlier, but there needs to be a whole connectivity of people and the movement of people. It needs to be examined very, very closely. So yes, there are people who are against it, but I think people who are against it are very parochial in their views. They're not looking at the bigger picture. They're not looking at the bigger picture. They're not looking at what's happening in Europe. They're not looking at what's happening down south. They're not looking at what's happening in Great Britain. They just need to wake up and see what's happening in even the environmental thing round about us. For instance, in France, if a flight they're bringing out laws now, if a flight is more an hour or less, that people must in future use railways instead of flying to save the environment, and they're putting people back onto railways. So when you look at that and what modern European governments are doing, I think we need to bring our game up as well and think in a modern sense of things and do things properly, and think of the future, not just think of the here and now, but think of the future and think of the children and think of grandchildren, and make this world a better place transport wise for everyone, and make it a pleasant place to live and travel in. Yeah, I agree. I mean, there's nothing worse than getting stuck on a traffic jam for an hour when you could be doing something. Well, as
things stand at the moment, I mean, if you look back to 1957 when that railway closed, there would have been a certain number of commuters, maybe who worked in Belfast shipyard or wherever, who travelled every day on that train. But the number who travel to commute in Belfast now would be huge compared to what that was. And I mean, they recently opened a 360 place car park at Portadown railway station. And that was before COVID started. That would have been packed every day. And if you'd taken the trouble, you would have probably found that a big number of those cars were people who had travelled over from Armagh.
Right. Because
a lot of Armagh people were actually, and Rich Hill people, were travelling to Portadown and using the train where they work in Belfast. I know quite a few of them.
Yeah.
And when in 1957 there wouldn't have been that number.
Yeah.
And of course, there would be a certain number of students who would prefer to travel every day rather than lodge in Belfast. And the railway has a great connection at the moment to Queen's at Botanic Railway Station.
Yeah, the amount of people that would be thrilled with that. Because,
and also, of course, to Jordanstown, to the Ulster University. Although they're moving into Belfast, but that'll still mean that people could commute quite easily from the Lake of Armagh in about 40 minutes.
Their parents would be happy with that, though. I thought we were getting rid of our kids.
But we're also told by governments today to think of the future and to think that people are going to have much more leisure time in the future. So people are going to want to travel more tourists are going to want to come to Armagh. People are going to have much more leisure time to visit places and to do things. So we need good infrastructure to be in place to let people travel and let people see new places in their lives. And I think think tanks and governments are saying that all the time, that people are going to have more and more leisure time. So people are going to want to travel more and travel more efficiently.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure if they look at the places that are serviced by the train, they'll find that the tourist industry is a lot stronger in those areas where there is an easy way to get there, that people don't have to drive or take 6 different buses. Yeah.
And apart from the tourists who would come to Armagh to see, there'd be a big number of Armagh people would, for instance, go to Belfast to go to the Grand Opera House.
Yeah,
or go to
concerts or anything,
go to various musical events and so on in Belfast. And those people can go up on the train. Now, the norm would probably be some of those people would go and have a meal and maybe take a few glasses of wine or something. Well, they would they wouldn't entertain going in the car.
No,
because it means
you've got a designated driver.
One person is to sit back and never drink anyway.
Exactly, yeah. So we can think of all the reasons in the world here for this to go ahead. So hopefully it will. There are strides being made now, and what's the next step?
We're glad to say that our local councillors, there's a unanimous agreement amongst all our councillors in our local council here to have the railway re-established again. There's a unanimity amongst them, and we have now got to the stage where we're going to have this technical report, which will be out very, very shortly. There's also going to be a new regional transport report for Northern Ireland, and we're hoping that this report's going to be part of it, and that's going to be a plan, not a strategy, but more importantly a plan of how transport will work in Northern Ireland. And then you have the Nicola Mallon and you have Eamon Ryan working on the All Ireland rail review, and we're hoping it will tie into that as well. And who knows, the railway may come to Armagh and then cross the border to Monaghan and then Clonus and swing round to the right round to Enniskillen, and who knows what it may go on to Sligo after that to join the whole.
We might even get as far as Donegal someday.
The whole system.
There's a whole swathe of Northern Ireland, starting up in the northwest at Derry, right down to Newry, where there's no railway line at all.
Yeah.
And it means that people who live in Omagh, Dungannon, Armagh, Enniskillen and so forth, they have no railway connection.
Yeah.
I mean, you have to think about the weather at times too. The railway would tend to be able to combat the weather much better than if there's about 2 foot of snow on the roads or something.
That's true, yeah.
If you think of the people of Fermanagh and the people of Tyrone, 2 large counties, they don't have any railways of any description at all. And you imagine how they must feel, and we feel it bad enough here in Armagh City that we're all taxpayers here. So we subsidise a railway as taxpayers on the east of the province, but we have absolutely nothing out of it.
Yeah.
But yet the taxpayers in this part of the world subsidise it.
Yeah.
So you can understand how people in the city of Armagh and other places feel so hard done by.
I know.
That they feel that can't avail of something that they can't accept. They want to travel a long way and avail of it then. But you can understand how they feel when they watch how people travel so freely and so fast on a fast system, and we cannot avail of that, yet we subsidise it as taxpayers.
Yeah, that's true. All right, well, thank you very much for talking to me, William and Bill. I really enjoyed that. It was really informative, and hopefully things will speed up and get moving, and sooner rather than later we'll have our train.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed, Elaine.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed that really informative chat, and hopefully we'll get the railway up and running soon, and hopefully the ministers and the council and everybody who's involved really takes this seriously and makes sure that it happens, because the benefits are there for us all to see. Remember to keep getting all of your news from Armagh Eye, and I hope you join us next time for our podcast.
From the
I don't know what to say. I'm just speechless.
to the,
Can't believe it.
we see all sorts of life-changing moments at McKinney Competitions. How would you react? Cars, houses, tech bundles and more from just £2 a ticket. No purchase necessary. For competitions, rules and conditions, see mckinneycompetitions.com.